In the section of the course on markup, I'll talk a lot more about the whole history of markup languages and what that all means, but let me just give you this short story for now. Once upon a time, there was large companies that had large amounts of information, all highly interconnected, and they needed some way of databasing that information. They looked at standard databases and they said, oh, that won't do. They really don't have the features to be able to represent long narratives and to be able to represent paragraphs interspersed with lists, interspersed with links, and all of those things being able to be created on the fly by authors who want to tell a story. Databases just aren't good at that, and we'll talk a little bit later about why relational databases really don't work for that. So they created something else called markup. Or actually, they didn't create markup, they created standard generalized markup language, SGML, in order to represent these very large, interconnected, highly formatted, very rich, very semantic databases of document information. SGML had a set of tags that went with it, or a way of marking things up. For example, the angle brackets and the quotes and the ways attributes are represented and the nesting of elements. All of that stuff was invented by SGML in order to create the kind of markup that was necessary in order to represent these rich, interconnected databases of text and images and that sort of thing. So along came the World Wide Web later on, maybe 5 or 10 years down the line from the invention of SGML, and some way was needed to represent the information on the World Wide Web, the text and pictures that were on the World Wide Web. The inventors of the web looked around and said, SGML looks like it's up to the task. So they used SGML, a standard generalized markup language, to create a particular markup language called the hypertext markup language. That's HTML. So the standard markup language, SGML, which really doesn't have any tags of its own, but simply specifies the rules for making tags, was used to create the hypertext markup language. And the focus, as the name implies, of the hypertext markup language was on something called hypertext. Hypertext was sort of the dream of the World Wide Web. And you can imagine what it would have been like, I guess it was the late 80s and early 90s when people started looking at the ability to link from one document in some server somewhere in the world to another document on some other server somewhere in the world, and thought, my God, this is an amazing new possibility that we've never had before. In the old print world, you were able to say, for more information, see this book in this chapter in this page, but you certainly weren't able to jump directly from the reference to the thing that's being referred to. So that's the hypertext part, and that was seen as a real dream of the World Wide Web. We'll talk much more later about the idea of associations and how that dream of the World Wide Web never really came true, but that was the idea, and that was why HTML was invented. The hypertext markup language, derived from SGML in order to represent text and pictures originally, but now the rest of the stuff that's on the World Wide Web. It was invented as a standard way for people to look at text and images across the web. Okay, so the syntax of HTML is exactly the same as the syntax of XML. And so you can see from that syntax there's a common ancestry there. In fact, HTML, as I said, was derived from SGML. It's a particular set of tags that were invented that were derived from the general rules of SGML. And XML is actually best thought of as SGML version 2. XML and SGML, for all intents and purposes, are indistinguishable. XML is a newer form. It has schema, as we'll see later on, but basically SGML and XML you can think of as the same, and as XML is a more recent version of SGML.